Ich will jetzt den nächsten Sprecher begrüßen, Joseph Kishore aus den USA. Ich freue mich, dass er heute hier sprechen kann und will ihn ganz herzlich begrüßen. Joseph Kishore aus den USA.
Thank you, Comrade Johannes. I would like to thank the comrades in the Socialistische Gleichheitspartei for the opportunity to speak to this meeting, which is concluding a very important election campaign, and I bring the greetings of all the comrades in the Socialist Equality Party in the United States, where this election is being followed very carefully. The election campaign of the SGP has stood out as the only one that is speaking to the real and most important issues facing the German and the international working class. Above all, the danger of world war. We are, as comrades have pointed to, holding this meeting under extraordinary circumstances. Over the past week, the world political situation has been dominated by the speech and the response to the speech of Donald Trump before the United Nations National Assembly, which was remarkable. Trump got up before the United Nations and threatened to, quote, totally destroy North Korea, a country of 25 million people, which can only be understood as a threat and a pledge to carry out genocide on a massive scale. Trump openly threatened to assassinate Kim Jong-un, declaring that he is on a, quote, suicide mission for himself and his regime. The threats of total annihilation have their own political logic. Having made such threats, U.S. imperialism will feel increasingly compelled to carry them out, to prove that it will not shirk from the most horrific crimes in the defense of its interests. Indeed, not since the height of the Cold War has the danger been so immediate that nuclear weapons, now much more powerful than those that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the Second World War, that these weapons could be used to commit mass murder. Indeed, one could say that the danger is even greater now insofar as no one can really calculate the actions and what Trump will do next. There's an element of unpredictability in the world situation that is unprecedented. If Trump were to carry out his threats, the consequences would be incalculable. Even a conventional war by the United States against North Korea would cause death and destruction not seen since the Second World War. A nuclear exchange would be catastrophic, involving the deaths of millions of people overnight. The United States would be turned into a pariah state, its government seen the world over, including within the United States itself, as an outlaw regime. As other comrades have indicated, I think the level of outright criminality and gangsterism coming from the American government can only be compared to that of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. I believe we have the ability to show a brief video. Comrades may have seen this already, a short and effective social media video that we put out a couple days ago.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Hat ausgemacht gemacht. Hat jetzt in seiner Hand Frieden oder Krieg, Serbien, könnt ihr über dieses Angebot jetzt akzeptieren und den Deutschen endliche Freiheit geben, oder wir werden ihnen der Freiheit entholen.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
A short video, but I think the point comes across. Mark Twain once said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, and there's a certain parallel, certainly, in the criminality, the threats, the naked aggression, which can be seen coming from the United States. Of course, beyond North Korea, in his UN speech, Trump threatened Iran, Venezuela, any country that gets in the way of the United States. The military, he declared, and not the American people, will decide where the United States goes to war and how long such a war will last. Since taking office 8 months ago, the Trump administration has issued bellicose threats against China, massively expanded the U.S. war in Afghanistan, including the dropping of the so-called massive ordnance air blast, or mother of all bombs, the largest non-nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal on Afghanistan. He launched strikes on Syria, Syrian airfield, escalated the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war against Yemen, and overseen the destruction of Mosul, Iraq. The United States is currently engaged in massive war games and military maneuvers in Eastern Europe on the border of Russia. I think millions of people are shocked by the filth pouring out of Washington, the threats of war all over the world, the attack on immigrants, the rise of extreme right-wing nationalism, the praise for neo-Nazis engaged in violent rampages, such as that in Charlottesville, Virginia. Workers and youth throughout the world are asking the question, what is happening in the United States of America? Of course, American politics is world politics. The actions of the American government have a direct and immediate impact on the entire planet. There is the line in the media, and I think it is expressed as well here in Germany, the so-called bad Trump theory of American politics, that somehow Trump is an accidental figure that has taken control of the American government, and only if he was removed or somehow brought under control, everything would be okay. Of course, various variants of such a theory are advanced by the Greens, the left party here, as a justification for advancing the interests of German imperialism, German remilitarizations. It's necessary somehow to build up the German state in order to counter this horrible figure, Donald Trump. There are other explanations in the United States of Trump, which the Democratic Party advances, in particular that somehow Trump is a product of the racism of the American working class, the so-called white working class. The inherent and unstoppable racism of the American people has produced Trump. These are all aimed at covering up the real origins and significance of the Trump administration. And it's necessary to understand this administration, first of all, to understand the conditions out of which it came. The Trump government represents a significant shift to the right in American politics, but it is not an aberration in an otherwise healthy and democratic society. It is ultimately an expression of a protracted breakdown of American and indeed world capitalism. For a quarter century, the United States has been engaged in unending and expanding warfare. An entire generation has grown up under conditions of permanent war. As the Stalinist bureaucracy was beginning the process of dissolving the Soviet Union, the first Bush administration in 1990-91 launched the first Gulf War in Iraq. This was followed under Clinton with the breakup of Yugoslavia, in which the German government played a significant role as well, and the interventions in Somalia, Haiti, and Sudan. The events of September 11, 2001, 16 years ago, provided an opportunity for the American ruling class to launch the so-called War on Terror and initiate what George W. Bush called the wars of the 21st century. Wars that began with the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, followed by the invasion and occupation of Iraq, a war launched on the basis of naked lies about weapons of mass destruction. Obama, the Democratic Party candidate of hope and change, oversaw lethal military actions in at least 7 countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. Obama has left office with the dubious distinction of having been the first U.S. president to complete two full terms in office with the country at war. The aim of American imperialism has been to counter its long-term economic decline through the use of military force. The strategic logic of its drive for global hegemony brings it ever more directly in conflict not only with Russia and China, but also with the major imperialist powers in Europe. Germany in particular is looking to assert its own interests in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. While the election of Trump has been the occasion for a sharp intensification of the conflict between the United States and Germany, Trump is not the cause, but the symptom of a breakdown in the geopolitical order. The rise to power of Trump was only possible because the framework of American democracy itself had already been fatally eroded under the impact of unending war and unprecedented levels of social inequality. Abu Ghraib torture, Guantanamo Bay, extraordinary rendition, drone assassination, CIA black sites, NSA spying. Such terms are indelibly associated with the crimes of the war on terror. A massive military intelligence apparatus has been built up over years and decades that exercises overwhelming influence over American politics. Indeed, even as Trump was threatening North Korea, threatening to launch nuclear war, the United States Senate overwhelmingly passed a $700 billion defense appropriations bill, $700 billion, an astronomical sum to finance the U.S. war machine. And as Trump vows to totally destroy North Korea, one might be forgiven for thinking that he is in fact referring to Houston, or Florida, or the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico, which have seen in recent weeks the catastrophic consequences of the decay of social infrastructure in the United States. In fact, even as we're having this meeting, 70,000 people in Puerto Rico are being forced to evacuate as a major dam has just breached and unknown consequences of flooding are ensuing. Millions are without power on the island, perhaps for months. The single-minded aim of the American ruling class for 4 decades has been to redistribute wealth from the working class to the corporate and financial elite, to rip up all the gains won by workers in the first part of the 20th century, to fuel ever more manic speculative bubbles on Wall Street. The share of national income received by the bottom half of the population in the United States fell from 20% in 1980 to 12% today, a massive drop in the share of national income. During the same period, from 1980 to today, the income of the top 1% has risen by 205%. And for the top 0.001%, the real corporate and financial aristocracy, it has risen by a staggering 636% in 25 years. American politics is a hollowed-out shell, incapable of giving genuine expression to the interests of the broad mass of the population. In a recent book, What Happened, Hillary Clinton gives all manner of explanations for her defeat in the 2016 elections. It was the product of the nefarious actions of Putin, of Russian hackers, or it was the role of Sanders for raising expectations that could not be fulfilled, all avoiding the real cause, which is the fact that the Democratic Party is correctly identified by millions of people as a party of Wall Street and the military. Clinton, the Lady Macbeth of American politics, proved unwilling and incapable of articulating a program that could attract broader support. Her campaign was directed at winning the backing of financial speculators and military generals, along with the sections of the upper middle class on the basis of identity politics. 8 years of the Obama administration has had its impact. While Obama and Clinton were going around declaring that it was the best time to be alive, a claim that was recently echoed by Merkel, who has said that Germans have never had it better than they have today. as they were making such claims, millions of people were experiencing a very different reality. Declining life expectancies, rising healthcare costs, a drug epidemic that is out of control, water systems poisoned with lead, low-wage jobs, poverty, and unemployment. If Clinton indeed had won the election, the first consequence would have been a massive escalation of the war in Syria and moves towards a confrontation with Russia. In light of Trump's threat to totally destroy North Korea, it's worth recalling that it was Clinton back in 2008 who threatened to totally obliterate Iran. Since the election, the focus of the Democratic Party's criticism of Trump has been on issues of foreign policy, and particularly the demand that it continue the anti-Russia offensive and policy of Obama. CIA spooks and military generals responsible for the worst crimes of American imperialism are held up by the Democrats and the media as tribunes of democracy. People like James Mad Dog Mattis, the defense secretary, the Trump's defense secretary, who Bernie Sanders said upon approving his nomination at the beginning of the Trump administration that he hoped that Mattis, who's responsible for the destruction of Fallujah in 2004 during the Iraq War, personally led that offensive, which annihilated a major Iraqi city. Sanders said he hoped that Mattis would moderate the positions of the Trump administration. Moderate meaning that he hoped that it would ensure that the military had stronger control over the White House. Democrats' attacks on Trump have been combined, particularly recently, with offers from the Democrats to work with Trump to enact tax cuts for corporations and a further attack on health care. And it is indeed extraordinary in the aftermath of Trump's speech on North Korea, in which he's threatening to wage nuclear war, that there's hardly a response in the American media from the Democratic Party. This has passed largely without comment. A few criticisms over the tone, perhaps he could have been a bit more diplomatic, but the war policy of the Trump administration is one that is essentially shared by the entire political establishment. And what has become of Sanders, whose campaign attracted widespread support among workers and young people, including no doubt many here in Germany? Sanders' appeal for a political revolution against the billionaire class resonated with a widespread sentiment that the entire political system is rigged to benefit the wealthy, and upon that basis and a growing interest in socialism, he won the votes of 13 million workers and young people during the Democratic primary. Yet Sanders' political revolution meant in the end support for the Democratic Party, and after urging all his supporters to back Clinton, he is now playing a leading role in the United States Senate. The experience in the United States is a universal one. The lessons that must be drawn from the rise of Trump are the same lessons that must be drawn from the political situation in Germany and throughout the world. The role of the left party, the Greens here in Germany, parallels the role of those who promote the Democratic Party, supported the campaign of Sanders in the United States. In the United States, as in Germany, there is mass anger and hostility to war, social inequality, and dictatorship. Yet this opposition has been systematically suppressed and distorted. It is indeed, I think, an extraordinary political fact that under conditions of a danger of world war, unlike anything seen, at least since the height of the Cold War, there is not any significant organized mass political anti-war movement. In the run-up to the Iraq War in 2002-2003, there were millions of people who took to the streets all over the world, in the United States, here in Germany, in Italy, in Britain. It was the largest, perhaps the largest coordinated international mass demonstration in the history of the world. All of that has been suppressed. The Democratic Party, in particular in the United States, is the leading champion of war. Here in Germany, you have the Left Party and the Greens emerging as the defenders of German national interests and rebuilding the German military. Such political developments are the expression of the movement of class forces, and in particular the integration of sections of the upper middle class, which these organizations represent, into the framework of imperialism and capitalism. At the beginning of the year, we wrote in our perspective on noting the centenary of the Russian Revolution, that a specter is haunting the ruling class, a specter of the Russian Revolution and the specter of socialism. And I think this is very much true. More than anything else, the ruling class is terrified of the emergence of a mass socialist movement. Trump declared at his UN speech in an extraordinary passage, "Wherever true socialism or communism has been adopted, it has delivered anguish and devastation and failure. Those who preach the tenets of these discredited ideologies," he said, "only contribute to the continued suffering of the people who live under these cruel systems." Of course, he was perpetuating or seeking to build upon the slander that socialism equals Stalinism. He was referring in the context of the speech specifically to Venezuela, but that's not his real concern and the real threat that they consider faces them. Their concern is about the growth of socialism. In response to Trump, one can ask the question, who represents a system that has delivered anguish, devastation, and failure? Which is the discredited ideology? What system is responsible for the Grenfell Tower fire, for Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, the devastation which has been wrought by these hurricanes upon cities that lack basic public infrastructure, for the devastation caused by the earthquakes in Mexico? Which social system created and produced the destruction of Iraq and Libya and Syria, which has created the greatest refugee disaster since the Second World War? What system is responsible for mass poverty, unemployment, for the resurrection of the discredited ideologies of the 1930s? And what social system has produced Trump himself, the personification that is of all that is bankrupt, corrupt, criminal, and reactionary? Of course, this social system is not socialism, but capitalism. The interests of the working class correspond to the program of socialism. We have seen in the United States the politicization of the working class, and that its initial politicization corresponds invariably to a surge in interest in socialism, in particular in the interests in the readership of the World Socialist website, the voice of international socialism. It will not be long, I think, before the readership of the World Socialist website numbers in the hundreds of thousands, indeed the millions. Wherever we go in the United States and speak to workers and young people about the social crisis, about the Trump administration, about the danger of war, there's an enormous response. There's a great deal of anger, opposition, hostility to the entire political system. All the efforts of the trade unions, the Democratic Party, all the organizations that orbit around it are aimed at blocking this. The greatest fear is that of the Democrats, Republicans, all of it is the emergence of an independent working class movement. It's for that reason, of course, that they mobilize the state apparatus. Here in Germany, in the United States, develop and expand the police forces, talk about left extremism, as they did in the aftermath of the Hamburg protests, work to censor the internet, as Google has done, in its desperate effort to strengthen the bought and paid for mass corporate media. The ruling elite in Germany, as much as in the United States, is aware that its greatest threat is that the working class will emerge as an independent force, that the great traditions of the Russian Revolution 100 years ago will again animate the struggles of millions of people. The history of the revolution, Trotsky wrote, is the history of the forcible entrance of the masses into the realm of the rulership over their own destiny. It is into such a period that we are entering. What are the tasks? Lenin, in the quote that Johannes referred to at the beginning, spoke of the highest task of humanity is to cognize the objective logic of social and economic development in order to adapt to it the consciousness of the most advanced classes, the working class, and to build a political leadership. That is the task that we face today. The ruling class will prove incapable of blocking the monumental social force, the international working class. The same capitalist crisis that produces world war is also producing the objective conditions for socialist revolution in the form of the growth of the class struggle. To guide and direct the growing anger and opposition of billions of people around the world to war, to social inequality, and the assault on democratic rights, A socialist and revolutionary leadership must be built. The working class must be unified all over the world. But this fundamentally is a political question, the question of building a political leadership. And is this task that the SEP in the United States, the SGP in Germany, and the International Committee of the Fourth International all over the world is dedicated.